Hey everyone, and welcome to today's video. Tis the season for baby goats to be getting a little bit older now. We're mostly past kidding season. And so the questions I'm getting are changing a little bit. And I recently have been getting questions about quads that are underweight. And so I wanted to go ahead and make this recording because I'm sure that some of you may have dealt with this, or maybe you know somebody who's dealing with this, or maybe you'll wind up dealing with this later. So what happens is, unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that a doe really cannot raise 4 thriving kids. And I know I've had lots of people go, oh, my doe raised quads. Well, just because they survived doesn't mean they thrived. And in fact, what often happens to those kids, and you've heard me talk about this in other videos, is that 1 or 2 of them, sometimes all of them, will wind up with chronic coccidiosis because they didn't get enough meat, they didn't get enough milk, and so their immune system is not very strong. And the coccidia are very advantageous and take advantage of that and overgrow. So what do you do? So, I absolutely advocate weighing kids for the first 2 weeks because most does have enough colostrum to feed 4, even 5 kids, no problem. But then what happens is that the kids double their weight in the first 2 weeks, which means they're going to double their intake of milk. And most does are not going to be able to keep up with that. So you might have the kids doing fine for the first 3 or 4 days, maybe even the first week. And then after that, 1 or 2 of them starts to slip behind in terms of the weight gain. So I'm talking about Nigerian dwarf goats here because they're the ones who typically have quads. And so these are the weights I'm talking about. I want to see all of my kids gaining 4 ounces a day for the first 2 months. And if they do that, they are going to hit 20 pounds by 8 to 10 weeks of age. And when they do that, then you really do not see coccidiosis in your kids. So we started weighing goats 10 years ago this year, and we've had 3 cases of coccidiosis in the last 10 years, and we've had hundreds of kids. So this really is a game changer. And it totally makes sense, right? We all know that good nutrition leads to good health. So you want your kids, and the best nutrition that kids can have is their mom's milk. So, but let's say that you didn't know this, or you have a friend who didn't know this, and now they've got kids that are 6 or 7 weeks old, and now they're seeing the difference. They've got one kid over here that's already, 18 to 20 pounds, and they've got a couple of kids that are 12 or 13 or 14 pounds. Now, obviously, those 12 or 13 pound kids are not going to be as healthy as the bigger kid, but I never say anything's impossible. However, I don't know anyone who has successfully gotten a 6 or 7 week old kid on a bottle. They have no clue what to do with it. You stick a bottle in their mouth, they're going to chew on the nipple. Really chew on it and just completely destroy it. So we did have a doe die one time when her kids were a month old. And it took a week, but we did eventually get them on a bottle. And it was a week of fighting and having milk spilled all over us, 4 times a day. So I really feel like we were at the upper limit in terms of like how old kids can be to be able to get them switched to a bottle. So what do you do if your kids are, 6 or 7 weeks old and they're underweight? So first of all, one of the things that one thing that's really important, a lot of times this problem is made worse by the fact that people have been separating overnight. So maybe even you have triplets, but you've been separating overnight. And so you're seeing some of the kids falling behind. So the first thing you would do is stop milking if you're milking so that the kids can get 100% of the milk until they reach 20 pounds. Once they reach 20 pounds is when you can separate the kids overnight and milk them. And so one of the things that I do not normally recommend medicated feed for baby goats, but in this case I would, because like I said, the biggest problem that you will have with underweight kids is that they wind up with coccidiosis. And throughout every summer I wind up getting lots of messages from people that got these little bitty kids. They're like 15 pounds at 3 months of age or 4 months even. And they've been treated over and over again for coccidiosis. And it's just because their immune system is so weak. They're not developing an immunity to coccidia like they should. And that's the thing. Pretty much, unless your goat has been living in a sterile room its whole life, it's got coccidia. And this is why most kids get coccidia once. That's it. They never get it again. They get coccidiosis. Sorry. Coccidia is the bug. Coccidiosis is the disease. So most goats will get coccidiosis once as a kid, and then they never get it again because that one time they got it, they developed immunity to it, and so they're good. So unfortunately, if they have a really weak immune system, they don't develop that immunity. And so it's like a dog chasing its tail. You just keep treating, you're like, well, I've treated this goat for 3 times already. I don't know what else to do. So to not wind up in that situation, if you've got kids that are, already, it's too late to increase their milk intake, then I would recommend giving them medicated feed. So buy a bag of medicated feed, and generally once it's gone, they should be over the hump. So there's medicated feed is going to be usually 16% protein. And so that is giving them a high protein feed. It's not as good as milk. Milk is still the best thing for them, but it's way better than grass. So they should also have alfalfa hay. So alfalfa hay is going to be like around 16 to 18% protein, occasionally even higher than 18% protein. So it's really important that these underweight kids not be fed grass hay, because that has half as much protein as alfalfa, and they really need the highest protein food they can get because they have such a tiny tummy. So make sure that you give them high protein feeds and that they have unlimited access to mom. If one of the kids has already reached 20 pounds, you could separate that kid overnight so that the smaller kids will have more of a chance, because those big kids will just continue to be aggressive and just keep getting more than their fair share of the milk and just keep getting bigger and bigger. And then, you've got a 25-pound kid with, its little bitty siblings. So once the bigger kid is big enough, you can separate them overnight. I know a lot of people will be worried about this because unfortunately this is like so old. Back when I got started 22 years ago, everybody just talked about selling kids when they were 8 weeks old. Nobody talked about weight. You still don't see people talking about weight, which is really a terrible tragedy, because a lot of kids are sold when they are much, much too small. So this is really sad when I get an email from somebody that says, I just bought a kid that's 3 months old and weighs 15 pounds and it's got diarrhea, because it's like, well, that kid really still needs milk. Unfortunately, mom is nowhere to be seen, because, you bought the kid and took it away from mom. Not your fault. So the kid shouldn't have been sold when it was so tiny and still needed milk. And so really at that point, the main thing that, there's not a lot that somebody can do. So that's really sad, other than feeding them a medicated feed to try and to knock the number of coccidia down. What medicated feed does is it interrupts the life cycle or the reproduction of the coccidia. Because where coccidia becomes a problem is when they grow out of control. So it doesn't actually kill them, but it slows down their reproductive cycle. And that can help. What ultimately happens is, if you have kids that have chronic coccidiosis, is that the lining of their intestines gets damaged and it can get damaged to the point where it's never going to recover. So they're never going to absorb nutrients properly. They will just be underweight forever. And they're not going to grow to their full genetic size. So this is always tricky. If somebody's like, oh, I'm going to buy a little buck to breed to my little doe, that's always a really risky proposition, because you don't know, like, is that buck little because he's got small genetics, or is he little because he had a case of coccidiosis that stunted his growth? So you really need to look back, like, okay, well, how big was his mom? How big was his sire? How big were their parents, to make sure that, you really are getting a small buck and not one whose growth was just stunted. So some people worry about, like, maybe you've got some of these kids reserved already. This kid is approaching 8 weeks and it only weighs 15 pounds, and you told somebody they were going to be able to pick it up when it was 8 weeks. I would not hesitate to contact the buyer and say, this kid was one of quads. And so it didn't gain weight as quickly as I had hoped. I really like to keep them until they're 20 pounds to make sure that you are taking home the healthiest goat possible. And so I would just like to keep it a little bit longer until it reaches that weight. And nobody has ever, and today I tell people that in the beginning. They're like, when can I take home my goat? And I'm like, when it is at least 8 weeks old and has reached 20 pounds, which usually happens somewhere between 8 and 10 weeks, because we monitor weight gain. But I've never had anybody tell me that, get upset when I said that I want to keep a kid longer, because I have occasionally said, I would like to keep a kid longer. And I just want to make sure I'm selling you the healthiest kid possible. Why would any rational thinking human being get upset with you for saying that? And honestly, if somebody did, I would not want to sell a goat to them. And in fact, I still remember this guy. This was like in the early years. So it was like more than 15 years ago. This guy he wanted one of my kids, and he was going to be driving past my farm when that doe was 2 weeks old, and she was nursing, and he wanted to get her. And I was like, no, I am not taking a kid off of mom and giving her to you, because it's not always that easy to switch a bottle fed kid or a dam raised kid to a bottle fed kid. And he got really ugly and nasty, and I said, if you care more about your convenience than the health of this goat, then I don't need to sell her to you. And he immediately changed his tune. So he thought he could bully his way into getting me to sell her to him, just so that he didn't have to make a separate trip to my farm to pick her up when she was older and big enough to be sold. So I have no patience for people like that. And I'll just tell them flat out that, if you don't care more about this kid's health than your own convenience or your feelings, like, oh, I was looking forward to getting her at 8 weeks. All right, well, you're an adult. You can deal with waiting another couple weeks, right? And even if your children are excited about it, fine. They can learn to wait too. So we don't always get everything we want at the moment we want it. Sometimes we have to wait for things in life. So anyway, those are a couple of tips. And then, I also just want to, in case you haven't heard me say this before, I learned all of this the hard way. Back in the day when I got started in the Yahoo groups, everybody was like, oh yeah, does can raise quads. And I actually had two kids, both does, that died from starvation. They were part of quads, and they were not gaining weight. And I would try to give them a bottle, and they wouldn't take a bottle. And I call those, and now I call them happy to be starving kids, So there are kids that they will let their siblings knock them off the teat. So every kid has its own personality, and you cannot assume that, like, oh, this kid is just smaller than the other, especially in a breed that is defined by its size. Like, yes, human babies have a really big variation in their weight gain, but that's because humans are very different, like humans can be anywhere from 5 feet to like 6 foot 4 inches. I mean, that's a huge, huge difference. My family alone, like one of my daughters is 5'2". My son is 5'10". And I'm 5'7", my husband's 5'8". Like, there's a lot of variation in the size of people. With Nigerian dwarfs, they are defined by their size, and most of them are not more, they're all within a couple inches of each other when they are mature, if their growth has not been stunted by a bad case of coccidia or parasites when they were a kid. So so that's why the first 2 months, it really is predictable that you will see that they'll average at least 4 ounces a day. If I have a bucket busting milker who has twins, they will gain 5 or 6 ounces a day. So, 4 ounces is the minimum average that I want to see. And when I say average, that means that, like, if a kid gains 3 ounces today, I want to see it gain 5 ounces tomorrow. So anyway, I've made other videos about this, but I had never specifically addressed, like, what do you do if your kids are already over a month old, and trying to supplement them with the bottle is out of the question. And there are things you can do in addition to just hoping and praying. And so hopefully you have found this helpful. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to post in the comment section below, and we'll get back to you. Bye for now.